course, we knew the Germans were coming, and we arranged to meet them in the drawing room. They were very respectful. I heard them wiping their feet on the doormat when they came in, and I said to my husband, oh, that's a sign of respect for the house, so we're all right, I think.
This documentary will focus on the impact of the German invasion of Guernsey, following the lives of inhabitants who were deported to German camps and their experiences of their life and treatment during internment. Guernsey is situated within the English Channel, between England and France. It is the second largest of the Channel Islands and is a British territory. During the German occupation of Guernsey, many islanders were moved across Europe to internment camps. One prominent camp in the Guernsey deportations was in the German town of Biberach. Biberach is a small town in the south of Germany, near the Alps, which housed a large internment camp for civilians evacuated from the Channel Islands. The Channel Islands were taken in the June of 1940, after the German capture of France. On the 28th of June, 6 Heinkel 111 bombers appeared in the skies over St. Petersburg and proceeded to bomb the White Rock Harbour. The war had come to Guernsey.
I heard these planes and I had a cucumber in my hand and I was waving this cucumber at the planes, didn't realise they were Germans. But when we realised, they started machine gunning, bombing. So we dashed into a house opposite ours and we went into a cellar light, and there was quite a few of us there, and the raid went on just over an hour probably, and you know, we were all frightened because we were so close to where it was all happening.
Initially 300,000 Channel Islanders were evacuated, but the vast majority decided to stay and tough out the invasion. Swastikas draped the town halls and the Union Jack was taken down. The Channel Islands were captured by the forces of the Third Reich and occupied for the remainder of the Second World War. The British government had determined that holding the islands would have been a logistical struggle, as well as being of little strategic importance, and had demilitarised the area, reasoning that its only value was for propaganda purposes. The islanders received limited help from the British and were ruled by the Germans until their unconditional surrender on the 9th of May 1945 aboard the HMS Bulldog, where after arriving in St. Petersburg.
As they marched through the streets of St. Peter Port, our troops received the concentrated welcome of a people who've suffered 5 years of misery in the only part of the United Kingdom ever to be overrun by Germany. Our men give their own cigarettes to the islanders who've been without such a luxury since June 1940.
By September 1941, the occupied residents of the Channel Islands were beginning to grow accustomed to life under the Germans, to the ever-present soldiers, the new laws and restrictions, and to the fortifications springing up around the coastline. However, a constant fear hung over the islanders' heads, especially those of English descent, that of possible deportation to and internment in Germany, a fear fuelled by an ever-whirring rumour mill. On the 10th of September 1942, the nightmare became firm reality with the appearance of a notice in the evening presses informing English residents of their imminent evacuation. That night the orders were served to families across Guernsey, Jersey and Sark. Yet the islanders had been living, blissfully unaware, under a false sense of security for a year. Unbeknownst to them, they had escaped an unconditional order from the Führer, without ever having realised it had existed. Indeed, the deportation saga had begun a year earlier, in September 1941, with the British invasion of Iran and the subsequent deportations and internments of German males in Australia. Hitler ordered the deportation of 10 English-born Channel Islanders for every one Iranian German, in retaliation to British actions. However, orders were misunderstood and delayed to the effect that by September 1942, the islanders still remained safe. This would have continued had it not been for the actions of the Red Cross, which drew Hitler's attention back to the islanders. Angry that his orders had not been carried out, he reissued them. It was made clear that all English-born residents in the islands had to go immediately. Dutifully, the island garrisons read the lists and handed out the notices. The next day, 2,000 islanders from Guernsey, Jersey and Sark were evacuated to France. The deportations had begun. In February 1943, a second wave of deportations took place. 266 native Channel Islanders were interned in transit camps in France, notably Compiègne, after which they were transferred to Biberach. At Compiègne, internees witnessed firsthand the harsh impacts of the Nazi regime on Europe, and were indeed the only ones to see this outside of the Channel Islands. Gillian Carr, writing in the Guernsey Press, describes Compiègne as an anteroom to the extermination camps.
Well, Compiègne was the worst camp we went to. I saw a lot of ill treatment by the Germans, and there was a French camp just the other side of us, and they were really badly treated there, and were beaten. And they were so weak at times when they used to fetch their food in the containers, they used to drop them, and so they used to get on their knees and eat off the ground.
The second wave of deportations was caused primarily by the British commando raid, Operation Basalt, in October 1942, where unreliable elements were deported in retaliation for the German deaths. Men, women and children were deported for little or no reason. Without warning, the Channel Islanders were cruelly split on the train. Men were placed at the front and women and children at the back. The train divided and the men were sent to Laufen and the women and children to Compiègne. There was little respect for the islanders. As many recall, they were transported like cattle and ordered into the camps in no uncertain terms.
Of course, as soon as we got to Biberach, all hell broke loose. The train doors were flung open. We were screamed at, pushed, jostled. Everybody had to get out of the train. They picked out men to unload the baggage, to put it into some lorries. We were then forced into, those who had small children who really couldn't have managed a 2.5 mile walk up the hill to the camp, were in fact put into lorries, backs of lorries, but the rest of us were formed into files of 5. We were poked with rifles and we were forced up the hill to the camp at Biberach. It was -0, the conditions were terrible. We all had to parade on the main square, and we were there for about 4 hours, and people fainted, people protested. Anybody who stepped out of line was threatened with a rifle or a pistol, and even though the men tried to protest, it was quite obvious that people would get injured if they argued any further.
Biberach is situated in the southeast of Germany and housed the main camp, Ilag Funf Bay, where the majority of Channel Islanders spent most of their time in internment. Though this was a Nazi camp, the islanders were not forced to work or mistreated on the scale as those in other camps, for example Monowitz. However, men and women were split up in separate barracks and were given a curfew and were punished if they did not stick to this. The weather was a key component to the harshness some internees refer to in their interviews, as temperatures plummeted below freezing and barracks only had little stoves with limited fuel. Internees were expected to be on parade 3 times a day for roll call and stood for up to 4 hours at a time.
Because we had separate barracks. The women were in barrack and men in others, and then the boys had to go into a dormitory. We were allowed to mix during the day, but at night we were locked in. I think it was 10 o'clock at night that the guard used to come and lock the doors, and then they'd open them at 7 in the morning.
Food within the camps was not so widely available, and many internees talk of the harsh conditions with little food.
I can remember being hungry then, because we hadn't yet got regular Red Cross food parcels, and I do remember being hungry and not liking the German bread at all. I didn't like it, and I didn't like the potatoes because they were in their skins, boiled in their skins, and they had, you know, when potatoes have been frosted, you get those black, well, because you had black lumps and all, and you couldn't pick them out because you were hungry anyway, so you ate them. But it wasn't. I wasn't keen on that.
Several weeks after the first deportations of Channel Islanders, an emergency Red Cross shipment was made to the camp. However, it wasn't until some months later that Biberach was recognised as an internment camp, and the Channel Islanders were supplied with Red Cross parcels every 12 days. These parcels contained school books, food and musical instruments. Once the internees were given their regular shipment of food, they were able to send some back to those in the Channel Islands, few even bothering to try and eat the German rations. In addition to sending food back home, those deported communicated with those on the Channel Islands through letters.
My dear mother, Dad, a brilliant hot day. Much cooler indoors, so spending afternoon in my bunk. Must tell you how we spent Dee's birthday yesterday. She was very popular, and all our room packed a box of goodies from Red Cross parcels for her. cigs, prunes, sugar. We went to PT at 9, spent the rest of the morning as usual, chores and walking the boundaries. Afterwards had tea with 6 friends, sardines, chocolate spread, and a cake I made of crushed biscuits. At night we went to a show by the children of the camp, and at 10, the 16 of us in night attire drank to Dee's health. Some of us sang Two Eyes of G.
Internees within the camp had different experiences, but on the whole there seemed to be an abundance of camp activities. There were dances, concerts and plays put on by internees, with Biberach's own band being a prominent part of camp life. In addition, children attended school, whilst adults enjoyed recreational classes, such as sewing and health and beauty. Internees often went on walks in the surrounding area of the camps, where they were allowed to barter goods with the local population. These trips weren't without incident, but on the whole they were a welcome break from the confines of the camp.
We did go out for some walks from late 1943, but basically you were behind double posts of barbed wire. There were searchlights, there were machine guns, there were Germans with guard dogs. The routine softened as the war went on, I must say. The Germans no longer were flashing searchlights or looking belligerent.
Biberach was not the only camp that internees were transferred to, such as the women's only camp in Biberach, which Nellie Lefevre moved to after 16 months in Biberach. Channel Island internees look back on their experience of Biberach and the deportations differently.
Well, at times it's quite painful to speak about. I wasn't too sure how I'd feel when I returned the first time in 2002. And of course it wasn't at all as I remembered it. The German people I stayed with were very kind, and the husband was very apologetic because he was so upset to think of.
They put us on a par, really, we deportees, with those who were evacuated. There are those people who say that in the end you were better off in the camps because you got more food than we did in Guernsey, and you didn't suffer the way we did under the Germans. But of course this is a matter of attitude and evaluation, basically. I mean, Guernsey and Sark may have been occupied, but people could walk out through their front door and lead on their front gate, or go out into their garden and do some gardening, or walk around. This wasn't something we could ever do. I mean, we were bottled up. It soon became obvious to us that we were extremely fortunate, because we had several intakes of people from Bergen-Belsen who came to Biberach and the other camps, and they were in a deplorable condition. So we always felt that there was more pressure on us than there would have been on the people in Guernsey. I think probably towards the end of the war we were better fed, because one of the things that happened is that Red Cross parcels came, and we had a large store, and they were able to build up a store of Red Cross parcels. Whereas, and the International Red Cross and the protecting power looked after us. So
the Channel Islands commemorate the deportations through a plaque remembering the names of those who died during internment. Those internees who are still alive today have 2 separate meetings a year to remember the impacts of their deportation. In 1964, compensation was received by the islands from the German government for damage caused by the Germans during the occupation. However, the illegal deportation of islanders was not included in this, and the people who were interned in Biberach have been overlooked by the authorities, much to their frustration. Whilst reconciliation has been offered by the people of Biberach, who have now formed a strong bond with Guernsey, ongoing efforts to receive compensation are proving fruitless, with some suggesting that the British government are unwilling to help the deportees' case, lest the skeletons in their closet over Iran are unearthed.